Today we are embarking on looking at one of our women from Scripture in our effort to define a woman of valor is. Back in our first episode, we looked at Proverbs 31:10, and that word that is often translated as virtuous or excellent can also be translated as a woman of valor. It's the same original Greek word that is translated as men of valor or man of valor. For some of the mighty men throughout Scripture, they are described this way. And the word means to be a force. It can be used as, the word could even be an army. It's this force for change, this force that makes an impact that keeps moving forward. And virtue is a part of that, because you do have to have a good moral character, which virtue is. It's that intention to keep moving forward even when things get hard. Virtue is what makes you keep going. It's what makes a soldier keep running forward. Courage comes from having virtue. You keep moving on even when you're scared. And so a woman of valor is many things, and she's described in Proverbs 31 in the way in which she expresses that valor, in the way in which that she is a woman who fears the Lord, and she does that by her actions. We see it in those things that she chooses to do. It's in the way she speaks, it's in the way she takes care of other people, and it's the way that she builds her relationships. And now we are going to go through and look at some women from Scripture and see what they teach us about being a woman like this. In our second episode, if you want to go back and look at that, we talked about being single, and that's our focus right now, is single women. It's going to cross over into married women because all the characteristics can be applied. But right now we're focusing on single women because somewhere I think it gets lost that there's no shame in being a single woman. Yes, God made man and women, made them to be able to procreate and to populate the earth, and that's part of our function, right? We accomplish that. But Scripture has many people who are not in that relationship yet, who still have value for God. Our value is not seen in the fact that we are married. It's just that being married is one of the relationships we can have wherein our value plays out. So singleness is not something to be ashamed of. It is not something to look down on someone else because they are single. Yes, we could, there's a lot of people who long to be married who aren't, and we can pray for them and we can encourage them, but we need to not make them feel as though they're worth less because they're not married yet. And so I want us to look at some of these people in Scripture when they were single and see how they emulated the characteristics that the woman in Proverbs 31 has. Because as we established in the first two episodes and also back in season 1, the woman in Proverbs 31 did not magically become this woman the day that she became married. She has characteristics, traits about her that had to have existed to some degree before she became married, and she's nurtured them over time because we see her at a particular season. And then we also talked about the widow over in 1 Timothy 5. She's the same type of woman. Her season has just moved on to the next season. She's now a widow, no longer has a husband, no longer has children, but she is still described with a lot of the same characteristics. So today, let's focus on a single woman, and let's try to study our Bible as though it's written for women to get something out of it specific to women. Think about it in terms of, this is what I learned about the woman in Proverbs 31. Why did that king's mother think this type of woman was such a treasure? And now I'm going to go look at a woman in Scripture and measure her up to what God has described as kind of this ideal type of woman, but who is also a very real woman. What does a woman who fears the Lord look like? What does she look like? How does she behave? And so today our journey is going to take us over to the book of Ruth. You have 4 chapters that covers a pretty big span of time for this one woman, but it gives us, it hones in on these events that she comes to, and we can learn a lot about her while she is single. We meet Ruth in chapter 1, we learn about Naomi and her husband who had gone to Moab because there was a famine back home. And they've gone to where there's food. And they took their 2 sons with them. And while they were there, we learn in chapter 1 that both of those sons married women from Moab. And those women are Orpah and Ruth. And then somewhere in the 10 years, I read the scripture in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 4. It says, they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah and the name of the other Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. I take that to mean that the total time that Naomi and her family was in Moab was 10 years. Maybe not. Maybe it's 10 years from the time that the boys married the girls. I'm not sure. But it's not for a short period of time. They're there for quite some time. But anyway, in that time period, all of the men die. Naomi's husband and both sons. So all of these women are now widows. So we meet Ruth. She's a widow, and she is living currently with her mother-in-law and her sister-in-law. Naomi decides to go back home because she's heard that there's food back home, and she doesn't need to stay in Moab. And also, that's where her family is. That's where her protection's going to be. So she tells both of these girls, you need to stay here. Stay here. Find husbands in Moab. This is where you're from. After a little bit of back and forth, Orpah decides to stay. But Ruth refuses to go. She does not want to leave Naomi. And she makes the famous declaration that is often quoted in weddings because it is so beautiful. She promises over in verse 16 she asks Naomi not to ask her to leave. And she goes, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. When you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. So right off, we get a picture of this young woman. She's been married. She doesn't yet have children, but she is very good about caring for her mother-in-law. And beyond just caring for her mother-in-law, she has seen the value in Naomi's God. She has decided to put off the beliefs of whatever she was raised in Moab and take on following the God that Naomi follows. And it's not just, I'll do whatever your God says. She actually calls on God to hear her vow, her promise to stay with Naomi and to not abandon her. So it's not just that she's following Naomi because Naomi follows God. She is choosing to follow God. Your God will be my God. And so right here, we see a very trustworthy young woman. She's grown to have a faith in God, and she is allowing that to drive her decisions. So she is willing to go with Naomi, to go back. They're going to go back to her people, and she is content to just be the one who helps to take care of Naomi. This is what she's after. She wants to stay with her mother-in-law and take care of her, and she was willing to leave her country and go back to Naomi's country and do that. That's a big life change. There's a lot of love. There's a lot of care in that. And this is what we see in this woman in Proverbs 31. It's not required that one leave their country to do that, but we see in Ruth a woman who sees others' needs and is willing to take care of them. She steps up to take care of those things. So Naomi agrees. They go back home, but they're struggling. They don't have men who are working for them. And so immediately Ruth goes to work. She asks for permission and goes to work to glean in the fields so that they can have grain, so they can have bread. So she's a hard worker. That's one of the things on our list of characteristics of a woman of valor. We have a woman who is a hard worker. She's willing to work, and she works hard. And this aspect of her gets attention. If you'll notice over in chapter 2, she goes to a field that is owned by Boaz. And it just so happens Boaz is a family member. He's a distant cousin of Naomi's. But she goes to this field and she asks permission to gather, which would be common for the poor people to be able to gather at the corners. God had made law that anytime you gathered a field, you intentionally left some in the corners and along the edges so that the poor could come gather. So she goes where she knows she can take something without it being a problem. She's not stealing. She is taking what is provided for her because she doesn't own the land. The rest of the grain is not hers, but God has provided this for her through the efforts of the one who owns the field and their willingness to be obedient to God by doing what God has said. So there's a lot of fearing God in these relationships that we're seeing. So Boaz he came from Bethlehem, it says in chapter 2 and verse 4, and he talks to the reapers. He greets his reapers, and he notices this young woman. So this is a different woman. He's not seen her before, and he says, "Who is this?" And the servants tell him, "She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. So she came, she asked permission, and she's been working. And she has this reputation not only for being the hard worker. She's worked all day. She's only taken a short break. But that she is here to take care of Naomi. That she came from Moab and she came to do this. People know this about her. Her reputation has come before her. And this is told to Boaz. And Boaz is struck by this, and it moves him to tell her to not go to any other fields. She only is to glean from his fields. So she needs to stay there. And not only does she glean from his fields, but she's to stay near his maids. He's offering her protection already. He says, you go where they reap, and no one is to bother you. You can, if you're thirsty, you can go to the water jugs and ask the servants to draw. He has already protected her. He's given her what she needs and is caring for her, moved by her behavior. So a woman who is willing to work hard, she cares for other people, she's kind, she's respecting of authority, she's asking permission, she's not coming in with an attitude of, hey, somebody owes me anything. She's coming in willing to work. All of these things are a woman of valor. Ruth is showing us a Proverbs 31 woman in action. Okay? And as you follow the story, Boaz continues to make inquiries. And while he's doing that, Ruth goes home and she talks to Naomi. And Naomi says, "Where did you go?" And she gets excited when she learns where Ruth has been and who she's encountered. And she hatches a plan. She has an idea that this might work out well to Ruth's favor. And so she encourages her to build a relationship with Boaz, to keep his attention, but to do so in a respectful way. Make sure that he doesn't forget her. Tells her to put on clean clothes, go down and to put herself in a position of submission to him. She doesn't do anything that's inappropriate. She just makes sure that he knows she is recognizing him as basically the head of their house. And when she does this, Boaz treats this as a precious thing, but he's very careful because he wants to do what's right towards her, but also in the eyes of the law. He knows that there's another who is between them in the family line who could take the rights of Ruth's husband, and take her as wife. There was someone else who would have that obligation to fulfill before Boaz did. And so he goes, he looks into that, and long story short, he makes that happen. He makes sure to abide by the law. I think he's pretty clever in the way he puts it to the man, because he puts it in a way that most likely the man is going to go, yep, that's not in my best interest, so you can take that responsibility on. But none of these things would have happened if Ruth had not been who she was. She shows her fear for the Lord and her respect for Naomi. She shows her respect for authority in the way that she handles herself when she comes to this foreign country, hungry. Obviously, Naomi is aware that there is family to call on, but Ruth didn't go pounding on doors going, hey, you all owe me and Naomi some help. We're just here. We're destitute. She didn't do that. She did what she could to provide for herself and for her mother-in-law. And her reputation was such that it got the attention of the people where she was working. It overcame the fact that she was from Moab. Nobody seemed to care. Nobody was bothered by where she went because her character is so honoring to them and to Naomi and to God, I believe. And through the rest of the story, you have this young woman who's been married, she's been a widow, she's moved to a new country, she's a hard worker she's a caretaker, and through all of this, she becomes the mother of a son that is going to become, this is all the lineage of Christ, because David comes through her. And I find it fascinating when you connect these dots too, that Boaz, the man that she marries, is the son of Rahab, that we learn about way back in the book of Joshua. So what kind of impact would that have? One woman from another country, from another people, being brought into Israel, and then this woman possibly welcoming another woman like her into the population because of her son. I don't know for sure if Rahab was alive or not. She's not mentioned. But I find it fascinating that these two women are so close to one another, and God brings them in. And they are welcomed, and then they're in the lineage of Christ, because it's through them that David comes, and therefore down the road also where the Christ comes. So her reputation of being a hard worker, being responsible, caring for other people, being kind, showing wisdom and kindness, respecting authority, having a good sense of self. I didn't talk about that, but I don't know how you do any of those other things without having a good sense of who you are. There's nothing about her plea to go with Naomi that speaks of desperation because Ruth is afraid. Instead, she is expressing with confidence how much she cares for Naomi and how confident she is that she wants to go with her. She has a good sense of who she is and how she fits in the world around her. And she's a woman who fears the Lord. So Ruth is a good example of a single woman before she married Boaz, right? We don't get any picture of her while she's married to Naomi's son, but I'm sure that she behaved just as well with him. How else would she and Naomi be so endeared to one another? But we see her in this season of her life where she is a young widow in what for many of us would be a stressful circumstance, completely changing where she lives, changing her circumstances, going to a people she doesn't know, a people that her people are often at odds with. And she goes and she handles herself in a very good and respectful and honoring way. And it comes to the good of the people. And for you and me, it comes to our good as well. Because we get the benefits of Ruth and her story because of the blessing of Christ that came through it. And then you've got God who decided we needed to know her story. So what can I learn as a woman about being a Proverbs 31 woman from Ruth? Can I pay attention? Can I find ways to serve? Can I be willing to work even when it's hard? Can I be willing to acknowledge that someone else may have authority over me and I need to respect that and handle myself correctly in front of them? Can I be respectful towards the men around me and the other women around me in the way I talk, the way I behave, the way that I think? There's so much to glean from Ruth. And so I would encourage you to dig into Ruth's story, go through it. And I'm even going to encourage you to write the book out. I'm real big on scripture writing. There's a power in what your brain takes in when you put pen to paper and write out what you're reading. Your mind will pick up on things that you don't pick up when you read it or when you listen to it, and you'll remember it better. So write it out. But if nothing else, just read it, but go through it slowly and take notes. This is what it says she did. And then take a minute to go, what characteristic is that expressing? What does that tell me about her, given the circumstances that she did this and the fact that God points it out? And so you can go through Ruth's story all the way to the end. There's, lots of places she is glorified by the people because of the gift of this son that she gives to Naomi. And you can go through her story and you can find things that show you that God does not show this woman in a belittling way at all. She had all of her value before Boaz noticed her. But then Boaz noticed her. And it just goes on and enhances who she was anyway. Doesn't change a thing. She just went on being Ruth. And we get to see that with her. And so I hope that that encourages you. I hope that you can go read Ruth and don't put her in a box that, well, I'm not in that situation. Well, take what you can learn from her and apply it to your situation. Take it with hope. Take it with encouragement that God saw that as a valuable thing, as a precious thing that she acted the way that she did. God took care of Naomi and her sadness and her bitterness and all of her loss through this precious woman of Ruth being in her life. And their lives were opened up to new things. Naomi thought her life was done. But because Ruth decided to go with her, Naomi's life was changed. Because Ruth was who she was. She was a force that changed things for Naomi. She changed things for herself. And she made an impact on everybody going forward through time because of being a part of the lineage of Christ. So don't doubt that you have a purpose and a place, even in your singleness. That the way that you behave towards your employer, towards your family, towards your friends, towards the strangers around you can have an impact, and you can be a woman of valor in all of those moments. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait until some such moment. Just be her today. You have it within you, and you can learn to grow in any of those areas that you struggle in, and you can gain skills that help you to do those things. You've got all kinds of room for growth in this, but within that, you need to see that you are built to be a woman of valor. It's what God designed us to be able to do. So I want to encourage you, go out, put your armor on, gear up, and be that warrior woman, but do it as you are. You're not going to express yourself the same as the woman next to you. Doesn't matter. You go be the warrior woman you are. And be an impact in the lives of people around you. And if you do that, you are a woman of valor. So, I hope that you will take advantage of the rest of the season. We're going to look at another woman next week. We've got several episodes focusing on single women. Some of them before they're married, and then we also take a look at them at what happened after they got married. But then we have some women who are, all that we know of them is when they're single. So we're going to take a look at those, and then after that, then we'll look at married women a few episodes in. But the freebie that is down below the podcast, there's a link for a freebie that is a short study. It's a 7-day study if you just do what comes to you via email. But it is a study of what a woman of valor is, and it pulls some scriptures for you to gather those together as a means of encouraging you. And then you can take those ideas and put them on note cards and place them around the house. Pick a verse that encourages you to be a woman like this. And write that out. A woman of valor is one who picks something. You also have the little outline that gives you the bullet points for what a woman of valor is. And then an email series will come. You'll get a lesson every day that explores those just a little bit. And you can add to those lessons each of these women as we go through them. And then any other women in Scripture you come across, add them to the list. Who is a woman that you come across who is single that stands out? She did something that was a force that impacted the people around her, where she made a difference in a godly way. She's a woman who fears the Lord. That's what a woman in Proverbs 31 looks like. So, take the study. It's free. There's a link down below the podcast. Go and get that. You sign up for it. It'll come straight to your email, and then you'll get one email every day for 7 days with the study. And then you've got this lovely little study guide that you can just put right there. And when you listen to the podcast, you can make further notes on each of those character traits, which women can be applied to that. And I would love to hear from you. Love for you to send me an email. Tell me what you think. But it would also be great if you would subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. Encourage other women to find this. Help them to see their value where they are, and to stop letting the world demean them because they're not exactly like XYZ, whatever they decide to tell them it needs to look like. That God defines our value, and He does it in a way that makes it wide open for each one of us to be a good, value, and purposeful woman for him. So I hope that you found this beneficial. Again, subscribe, share it with your friends. If the podcast player that you use has a means for you to leave a review, I would love if you would do that. I would be very honored. And that will help other people to see it if you can highlight it in that way. If you can leave some kind of a review or stars or whatever it asks you to do. Each player's got a different means of that. That would be a great thing. But biggest of all is if you can share it with your friends so that they can go through, and maybe this will help them find a way to dive into Scripture and find hope in a day when it's pretty hard. So anyway, enjoy and have a good one. We'll see you at the next episode.